Good morning. My name is Reverend Carolyn Penhale, and I serve as one of the ministers here at Orleans United Church, where Pat was a faithful member for many years. I was also one of Pat's PEO sisters and feel honored to be able to preside this morning. We gather here today to grieve and to celebrate. Thank you for being here to celebrate Pat's life and to support and encourage one another. You are all invited to a reception in the hall directly across from the sanctuary right after the service concludes. And now please pray with me. O God, creator of all life, help us to accept death as part of life, trusting in your goodness and great love for every one of us. Now we feel the pain of parting with a loved one, but we rejoice that so many were blessed to experience life with her. We entrust Pat to you in death, as in life you entrusted her to us. Let us feel your presence now as we remember her together. This we pray with hope in Jesus' name. Amen. And so at this time, I would invite members of Pat's family to come forward to the lectern and share their words of remembrance with us.
All her life, my mother always wanted a cottage by a lake. Nothing fancy, just somewhere the family could go when we needed a weekend destination. A place to cool off and swim in the clean, fresh water. That dream always seemed to come and go while we were growing up in the house. It never happened because, in truth, cottages are a lot more about hard work than idle leisure. I've always liked them too, and I hope that her dream was at least partially fulfilled when I built my house, and that she got her place by the lake and a wish come true. My wife Julie wrote this. Thank you. I couldn't have asked for a more loving, easygoing woman for a mother-in-law. Every summer, Patty and Martin would visit us for 2 weeks. Those were always 2 very busy weeks, packed full of berry jams, crisps, and pies. We would go berry picking at a local U-Pick farm, and then Patty would spend the next several days preparing anything and everything that had to do with berries. Blackberries were her favorite. She was a bit crazy for blackberries. By the time Patty and Martin were headed back to Ottawa, our freezer was stocked for the year with frozen berries, our pantry full of jams, and our poor stomachs desperately needing a break from too many berry desserts. Patty loved to swim. She always said it was because she floated so well. She would disappear down the lake for what seemed like hours, and all you could see was her white head bobbing in the water. At times, concerned for her safety, we needed to get the binoculars or go out in the boat to tow her back to shore. Then together, we all enjoyed drying off and dozing in the sun, with evening barbecues on the deck. We took many spring break trips with Patty and Martin as well. By early April, they were ready to get out of Ottawa and head somewhere warm. We went to Arizona, Utah, and California. If some of the family wanted to go on a hike or a bike ride, Patty was happy to pack a picnic lunch and sit in the shade of a tree. Heidi, our daughter, would often keep her company. Patty was a wonderful grandma. She always had a special bond with Heidi. As a baby, Heidi would easily fall asleep in Patty's arms when she was restless with everyone else. Heidi and her grandma could play for hours. They would play silly games and perform wedding ceremonies with Heidi's stuffed animals. They liked to sew and craft together, making clothes for Heidi's dolls, and then Patty would make a matching set for Heidi. She was a very patient grandma who was always there with a big hug when needed. Those summer visits were full of quality family time, and I am grateful for them now. Patty was a generous woman who spread her love in many ways. We will miss her dearly. My mother had a lifelong interest in our extended family. I bet it was partly about her childhood, but as much as a way of remembering and to gain a deep sense of attachment to the past. I recall from an early age her bantering with relations about the infinite details of who was related to whom. She was interested in both sides of our family and worked to develop family trees. I found a special scrapbook on the shelf dedicated entirely for her sister. Even the photo montage today would have been nearly impossible for us if she hadn't, in these last few years, organized the boxes upon boxes of photos and labeled them so well. She was usually up for any family reunion, and almost every vacation involved a visit to some relatives or relation. Later on, she made a point to go to important extended family events whenever possible. Another needle and thread that ran through her life is her handicrafts. You will all be familiar with the quilts. Oh my God, the quilts. How many quilts can one person do? I have asked this more than once. Of course, I was always happy to get one as a gift. But it wasn't just quilts early on. Macrame, needlepoint, crochet, and ceramics all visited our lives at one time or another. I think she spared herself lace, but she didn't spare us sewing. I admit there's nothing wrong with sewing. You can fix a ripped shirt or hem some pants. But sewing can scar too. The wound came in grade 7 or 8. The handicrafter, home economist, had up until then made all my school clothes. A group of boys in gym class came up to me and said, "Hey, Tim, nice pants. Where did you get them?" I looked down and then up, and I replied, "Nowhere, I guess. My mom made them." They all laughed and walked away. I could only stand there beaten. After school, I definitely let my mom know it was time to pony up for store-bought clothes. Maybe that's when she started quilting. As I remember and honor her life today, I would like to talk about what it meant. Excuse me. I would like to talk about what it meant for my mother to become a Canadian citizen. I feel that expat living is something we share. Her taking a new citizenship wasn't something that came quickly or casually. So I believe she waited, always fine with who she was. And finally, when she had lived in Canada long enough to raise her children, to contribute and to come to care so much for the community and the country, only then, after such deep attachment in people and places, the roots had grown deep enough into the Canadian dirt that they had truly taken hold. That no storm could rip them out, and that only then she knew the transformation wasn't false. So she did the paperwork, took the oath, voted, and proudly flew the flag. I would like to leave you with Heidi's words. As she tearfully hugged me when coming to understand that Grandma was very sick and probably would not get better. She wept. But Daddy, then who is going to bake all those yummy treats we get to eat on Christmas Day?
Good morning. I am Robert Fike, the maternal uncle for Patty. I had a unique experience. She was born during the Second World War, and her father was in the Navy. He was on his way from Florida, captaining a minesweeper to join the Pacific Fleet that was to be a part of the invasion of the island of Japan. Because of that, she and her newborn, Patty, moved into our home. It was an interesting event for me because I was 13. She was a very fussy baby. It turned out that I was the only one in the family that could quell her crying. So I spent many an hour next to her crib. And in the process, I learned some very important lessons, too, I'd like to share with you. One, how to bond with an infant. A rare gift, I must say. The second was to gain an initial nascent understanding of what it might be like to enjoy the joy of fatherhood. Her father, fortunately, was in the middle of the Pacific when the war ended. He was able to turn around and return home, and they continued their life. I didn't have an intimate relationship with her after that. Our ways were separated as they went to the state of Iowa to enjoy his profession. New children were born, and so forth. But during that period of time, while less intimate, I was able to observe occasionally Patty and her behavior. She was capable of a full range of emotions. Some were very negative, some and many were very positive. But the thing I was most impressed with was the evenness of her temper. While she may be angry, she would never raise her voice, and frequently afterwards would modify her position to say, I understand why I feel this, and modify her behavior accordingly. It was the kind of thing that allows someone like myself to validate the basis of her faith. She endured some very testing times with the death of her 3 siblings. They all died of a very unusual, rare disease that was protracted and very difficult to deal with. It was the kind of situation that tested the deepest moral values of anyone in the family. Most of them lingered grotesquely long before dying. The integrity that she showed during that period of time and the decisions that needed to be made gave one a sense of how to have moral strength. It was much more demanding afterwards often, as she had to assist the family, her family, other family members, and so forth, trying to adjust to the awkward situations that followed. She prevailed where others would have surely faltered. These qualities, I think, were carried forth after her family matured and have been manifested in what she has accomplished and for which some of you will probably testify today in dealing with the immigrant families who needed to be encultured, and she demonstrated that she took on these tasks out of a sense of real Christian faith and a sense of prevailing when things were not easy. She was blessed, I think, in having a husband, Martin, who is quite similar in disposition and temperament. They complemented and synergized in these endeavors. Her death has been one of great loss. I feel that sense of loss, but I am very grateful for what I was able to observe in her life. I trust she will be well received as her soul comes to rest. Thank you.
And now I invite 2 of Pat's friends from the congregation here in Orleans to come forward together and offer your words of remembrance.
I'm Sharon McWilliam. Pat and I spent hours and weeks together sewing and talking. A majority of the banners around this church began with Pat. She had stacks of books with banner ideas. She took workshops in Minnesota, came home, and produced bursts of color and messages from her heart. You can get a good idea of who she was simply by looking at each one she made on her own. They speak clearly about her generosity, her warmth, her belief in the value of each and every person, and of joy in what we do. Together, we collaborated on a lot of banners. She would come to me with the concept, we need something for Pentecost, which commemorates the coming of the Holy Spirit, symbolized by these doves, to the disciples after Easter, actually about 3 weeks from now. I would mull it over for a while and come up with a visual representation for the words she had given me. I had never worked on anything quite as big as this space requires. But she gave me lots of encouragement to stretch and try new things. She taught me techniques and introduced me to tools I'd never needed to use before. And she was oh so patient with me as I figured out how to take the idea in my head to a little drawing, work out the practical problems, and then blow it up with an overhead projector to make pattern pieces for something 12 feet long. At that scale, we needed the help of many people to pull it off, and many of them are here today. For the Part of Me banner over there, everyone in the congregation donated scraps of fabric waved like palm fronds during the Palm Sunday service, and in a sweaty, blood-stained week, jabbed with pins, we sorted and put them all together for Easter. It took 2 to 3 people to hold the weight of all that fabric so that one person could shove it through a sewing machine. I stood in awe in the aisles of fabric stores as she calculated in her head how much fabric to buy of each color, how much it would cost. I quickly gave up any pretense of helping with a calculator. She was faster and better. We took turns driving each other crazy. But I loved every minute we spent together. I loved her laugh. I would make sure before we met to have some topic to talk about that would set her laughing. She laughed so easily, and it always lifted me into a brighter mood. As we worked, our stuff sprawled across my dining room or hers, or taking up the library there, the hall, and maybe another classroom. We talked about the problems of the world, about our community, about our families. And if she thought the church needed a nudge, we would come up with a banner to carry that thought a little further. Sometimes our banners have traveled further afield, lent out to other churches for a conference on worship arts, or we would be commissioned to do one for another congregation. And we began to do stoles for people who had come from this church and gone on to become ministers themselves. Nancy, Dan, could you stand up? She designed and made those. They are so rich and so full of her love. I've been asked, what am I going to do now without her? And I don't know. I can't imagine it.
Good morning. I'm Margaret Richardson, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Interchurch Refugee Group. Nearly 2 decades ago, Pat joined the Interchurch Refugee Group, bringing fresh energy and enthusiasm to our charity. Her keen intelligence, superior organizational skills, and devotion to the cause were a huge gift to the IRG. An effective advocate, Pat never missed a chance to advance the cause of refugees or to invite new volunteers to join us. Pat played a pivotal role in the sponsorship of 14 families of new Canadians who arrived from Eastern Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Could Pat speak Spanish or Swahili or Arabic, you might be wondering? No, she couldn't. But Pat was fluent in the language of friendship. Smiles, hospitality, dancing eyes, laughter. Pat spoke the language of compassion. Hugs, tears, comfort, prayers. She spoke the language of hope and opportunity. She spoke the language of fun, picnics, soccer, fireworks. Pat spoke the language of service, appointments, registrations, mentoring, driving lessons. She spoke the language of celebration, births, citizenship, graduations, weddings. In short, Pat spoke the language of humanity, generosity, kindness, and love, a language that transcended all barriers and touched our hearts.
Something else I learned recently about Pat Ulrich is that she had a love of non-traditional church music. No golden oldies for Pat. Pat loved world music, social justice music. And so, with that in mind, I invite you to stand and sing together. More voices. Number 1. All are welcome. Let us build a house. memories continue as I invite 3 of Pat's PEO sisters to the lectern to share their words of remembrance with you.
I think I'm a little too short for that. A little over a year ago, we celebrated Pat's 50 years of membership in the PEO Sisterhood, a philanthropic organization where women help and motivate women to achieve the highest aspirations through educational grants, loans, and scholarships. Pat has always been a cornerstone for PEO. She has served in every office and committee at the local chapter level and served for 7 years on the Ontario-Quebec Provincial Executive Board, culminating as Ontario-Quebec Provincial President in 1998-99.
Joanne Bolton, good morning. I can't say enough about Pat. She was an exemplary PEO, a volunteer in the community for many causes, and a great friend. There are so many instances when I can think of her humanitarian efforts for PEO and its members. She cooked, sewed, did carpooling, and assisted in many interviews for students. She recently lent her loom to a member to embroider our names on a quilt. The last time I saw Pat was at our April 26th meeting, where she introduced a leader of a program illustrating how to make Ukrainian Easter eggs. And when the leader said we could make a donation for her supplies, Pat immediately took $10 out of her own wallet. For provincial convention, she was an avid supporter of the budget and getting it done right. She gave me remarks to mention at our recent convention. For me, she helped me with the treasurer position when I was in that position under Janet Erdeg's presidency. And when she knew I was down and out a bit financially, she once offered me extra food to take home from a meeting. For this upcoming year in our programs, Pat had already planned them all, as she knew so many community leaders. She was a beautiful person inside and out. I will never forget her.
Good morning, my name is Huila. My name is Huila, a Pat friend. I came to Canada from Thailand refugee camp in 2007. I met Pat at the airport. She and a friend group from the United Church helped me to find a place to live and furniture. After that, I became a friend, a very close friend. Pat was a very special person. She played a big role in my life and my family's. She was the most amazing person I ever known, with a good heart and a big smile. She was like a Canadian mother to me. She helped me so much. It's hard to describe the kind of person she was. She always had time for me and my families. And she understood the needs of the refugee who do not speak the language. She will be missed and will always be in my heart forever. Thank you.
Janet Erdeg, by the way. Pat and I first met about 42 years ago when we both were out in our neighborhood supervising our not quite one-year-old sons, Jamie and Mark, watching them run along the sidewalk in their walkers. With the discovery of our mutual interests while working together on community events, Pat and I soon developed a strong friendship. I will always be grateful for the day Pat gave me the wonderful gift of PEO. Because of her, my life has truly been enriched. I have discovered strengths I did not know I had, and I have met so many loving people. Pat and I had many adventures and trips together in PEO. We had countless discussions about social justice issues and politics, and shared moments of fun and laughter at her kitchen table over coffee, or in her van riding to and from meetings and social events. She was a wonderful friend who always stepped forward to give generous support in my times of need. Pat was a good neighbor, a caring friend, my loving sister. I'm sure I speak for everyone whose life Pat touched when I say that our lives will never be the same without the influence of her generous heart and her joyous laugh. Pat, your star will always shine brightly in our hearts.
I have other brief words of remembrance to offer. These will be perhaps a surprise to the family, but maybe not really. When I shared the news of Pat's death with Reverend Glenn Stout, he sent his regrets, but also sent along these words to share with you. Dear family and friends of Pat, peace to all of you as you mourn her death and celebrate her life. I too share sincere appreciation for Pat's faithful witness, expressed so generously through her passionate outreach as well as her fabric art. In my connections with her at Orleans United, I was continuously moved by her very personal investment in the many outreach ministries she supported, but never for her sake alone. Pat graciously offered herself to those she served, certainly, but she also did it for your sake and mine too, encouraging all here to stretch beyond our comfortable faith and together show God's care for others in our neighborhood, city, world. I, like you, owe Pat a great debt of gratitude and give thanks to God for her empowered presence among us. Glenn writes, Pat, well done, good and faithful servant. May Christ's blessing be felt among all of you as you continue to serve in her memory. Reverend Glenn. Now I'll invite Dave and Marcia to come to the lectern and share this morning's selections from our sacred texts.
I'll just add one more thing. Pat was also a bell ringer. Many, many years ago, she was one of the most keen people to ring bells. So I'm reading from Micah 6, verses 6 to 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with thousands of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Thanks be to God.
Good morning. I'm Dave McWilliam. I knew Pat through the Outreach Committee. This reading is from Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 to 36 and 45b. Then the king shall say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of this world. For I was hungry, and you, Pat, gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you, Pat, welcomed me. I was naked, and you, Pat, gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Truly, I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me."
Pat Ulrich was born in Morgantown, West Virginia in 1945 to parents Anna Lee Fike Reed and Lloyd Reed. Gradually, the family grew and came to include her brothers Robert and Thomas and her sister Janet. The family moved to Iowa when Pat was 6 or 7 years old. Her father was a regional agent in agriculture, which meant that they moved often throughout parts of Iowa. As a child, Pat would spend summers with her maternal grandparents, who were important to her and helped connect her to all her cousins. My sense is the development of this cherishing of extended family for all her life. Pat graduated from high school around 1962 in Ames, Iowa, where she later met Martin. He was studying for a PhD at Iowa State University, where Pat was working in a lab